The key turning in my front door wasn't the sound that chilled me. It was the silence that followed. My son, Mark, always hollered, "Mom, I'm home," from the foyer, his voice a big, booming echo of his father's. But today, there was only the soft click of the lock, followed by the whisper of expensive shoes on the hardwood floor I'd spent a lifetime polishing. I put down my knitting, the half-finished lavender baby blanket a sudden, foolish lump in my lap. My heart, a tired old bird, began to beat its wings against my ribs. There was a stranger with him. And my daughter, Sarah. I could feel her presence like a drop in barometric pressure, a storm on the horizon. Comment which city you're watching from and subscribe to the channel because I guarantee there's more to this story than meets the eye. They found me in the sunroom, staring out at the wilting hydrangeas Richard had planted for our 25th anniversary. Mark stood there in his sharp suit, his face a mask of strained patience I'd come to know too well. Sarah hovered behind him, her eyes red-rimmed, clutching her elbows as if she were cold. Between them stood a man with a kind, plastic smile and a leather briefcase that seemed to suck all the warmth from the room. "Mom," Mark began, his voice unnaturally gentle. "This is Dr. Evans. We're worried about you." The words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Worried. They hadn't been worried when I'd called them last week, my voice hoarse with the flu, only to be told they were too busy with work, with the kids, with life. They hadn't been worried when I'd mentioned the leaky roof or the strange noise the furnace was making. Their worry, it seemed, had arrived today, fully formed and accompanied by a doctor I'd never met. I looked from my son's hard eyes to my daughter's tear-streaked face, and a dreadful certainty bloomed in my chest. This wasn't a house call. It was an ambush, and I was the prey. Dr. Evans started asking questions. Simple things at first. My name, the date, the name of the president. I answered them all, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. But then the questions shifted, twisted. "Eleanor, Mark tells me you've been having conversations with your late husband. Is that true?" I glanced at the empty armchair by the fireplace, the one Richard always sat in. "I talked to your father's memory," I said, my voice sharp. "It's a comfort." "Is that now a crime? And the money, Mom?" Mark cut in, his voice losing its gentle edge. "You accused the bank of stealing from you last month. You made a scene. They changed the online layout." I couldn't find the statement page. A simple mistake, I defended myself, my cheeks burning with humiliation. They were twisting every little sign of aging, every moment of confusion, into a weapon against me. Sarah began to cry softly, a sound designed to fray my last nerve. "She's been losing things," Sarah whispered to the doctor, refusing to look at me. "Her keys, her wallet. Last week she couldn't find her car for an hour at the grocery store. It was parked one all over. For heaven's sake, has that never happened to you?" I snapped, my voice rising. I looked at their faces, a united front of feigned concern, and I saw their plan laid bare. It wasn't about my health. It was about my signature, my assets, my house. It was about control. The doctor made a note on his pad. "Eleanor, your children have procured a court order. Based on my evaluation and their testimony, we believe it's in your best interest to come with us for a more thorough observation. There's a wonderful place, Meadowbrook Manor. It's very peaceful." Peaceful. The word was a slap. He made it sound like a vacation. I looked past them, through the bay window to the garden, to the life Richard and I had built. They were trying to erase me from it. "No," I said, the word a small, hard stone. "I am not going anywhere. This is my home." Mark's face hardened. "Mom, don't make this difficult." He nodded to the door, and two men in orderly uniforms stepped into the sunroom. They were large and impassive. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't a discussion. It was a verdict, delivered and ready to be executed. I looked at Sarah, my heart pleading with her. "Sarah, please," I begged. "Don't do this." She finally looked at me, her face a mess of tears and guilt. "It's for the best, Mom," she sobbed. "We love you. Love." The word was more violent than any blow. They spoke of love as they directed the orderlies to take my arms, as they led me from my home of 50 years, my knitting falling to the floor. As they strapped me into the back of a sterile white van, I didn't scream. I didn't fight. I simply watched my house, my life, recede until it was just a tiny speck in the rearview mirror. A cold, terrifying calm washed over me. The shock was so profound it felt like clarity. They thought they had won. They thought they were taking an old, confused woman to be locked away. They had no idea they had just armed me. They had just triggered a plan Richard and I had set in motion a decade ago, a fail-safe for the one betrayal we prayed would never come. They thought this was the end. It was only the beginning. The first 48 hours at Meadowbrook Manor were a masterclass in dehumanization. The air smelled of bleach and despair. My room was painted a shade of beige that seemed specifically designed to soothe you into oblivion. It had a bed with stiff, starched sheets, a chair, a small dresser, and a window that overlooked a meticulously manicured lawn where no one ever walked. The window, I quickly discovered, did not open more than 2 inches. Freedom, measured and rationed. They took my clothes, my purse, my wedding ring. For safekeeping, a nurse with a professionally detached smile told me. They gave me a pale blue sweatsuit that felt like a uniform. I was no longer Eleanor Vance, wife of Richard, mother of Mark and Sarah, mistress of my own home. I was a patient, a number, a collection of symptoms to be managed. I was subjected to a battery of tests. Memory games with flashing lights on a screen. Questions about my childhood that felt more like an interrogation than a diagnosis. I answered everything calmly, lucidly. I knew they were building a case, and I had to build my own. During a session with a young, earnest therapist, I spoke about my grief for Richard. I let my voice crack. I let a few tears fall. I told her how much I missed him, how sometimes the house felt so empty I would talk to his photograph just to hear a voice. I gave them a version of the truth they could work with, one that fit their narrative of a lonely, grieving widow losing her grip. Let them think I was fragile. Let them underestimate me. It was my only advantage. A week into my imprisonment, Mark and Sarah came to visit. They sat across from me in the sterile family room, a place with all the warmth of a morgue. They brought a potted orchid, a flower I've always disliked. It was a perfect symbol of their understanding of me, superficial and incorrect. "How are you settling in, Mom?" Mark asked, leaning forward, a pantomime of concern. "The food is bland and the company is dull," I said, my voice flat. "Where is my wedding ring?" Sarah flinched. "It's safe, Mom." "At the house. We didn't want you to lose it." "You mean you didn't want me to have it?" I corrected her. "There's a difference." Mark sighed, a gust of theatrical exasperation. "See? This is what we mean. You're so paranoid. We're trying to help you. Help me by locking me up and taking my possessions?" I looked at them, truly looked at them, and saw strangers. How had the chubby-cheeked boy who brought me fistfuls of dandelions become this cold, calculating man? How had the little girl who slept in my bed during thunderstorms become this woman, complicit in her mother's caging? "We're managing your finances for you," Mark continued, ignoring my question. "Just until you're better. Don't worry, everything is being taken care of. The bills, the house maintenance." "The house," I repeated, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. "How is the house?" "It's fine, Mom." "It's just a house," Sarah said quickly, too quickly. "Is the rosebush by the back porch still blooming?" I asked, a test. Sarah's eyes darted to Mark. I think so. It's all fine." A lie. I had seen that bush begin to blight a week before they took me. It needed a special spray, one I kept in the garden shed. They hadn't even noticed. They weren't caring for my home. They were occupying it. The thought sent a jolt of cold fury through me. I decided then to change tactics. I couldn't fight them head on, not yet. I had to go deeper into the role they had cast for me. The next time the nurse came with my medication, I squinted at her. "Clara? Is that you? You've gotten so tall." The nurse, whose name was Brenda, gave me a patient smile. "It's Brenda, Eleanor. Not Clara." "Oh," I said, looking confused. "You look just like my sister when she was your age." My sister Clara had been dead for 20 years. I knew they would write it down in my file. Patient exhibiting signs of confusion, conflating present individuals with figures from her past. Good, let them build their file. Let them get comfortable. I started having bad days. Days where I would sit in my chair and stare at the wall, days where I would ask the same question 3 times in a row. I would misplace the book I was reading. I would call Mark. Richard. On the phone, each performance was a carefully placed stone. Building a path to my escape, they saw weakness. I was forging a weapon one evening. I remembered a conversation with Richard. Years ago, we were sitting in the sunroom. The very room they had taken me from. He had just received a difficult diagnosis. The one that would eventually take him from me. Ellie, he had said. His voice quiet but firm as he took my hand. We need to talk about the future, about the kids. They're good kids, Richard. I had insisted. They are, he agreed. But Mark has a hunger in him, and Sarah. Sarah follows. I've built a good life for us, for them, but wealth can be a poison if the vessel isn't strong enough. I need you to promise me something. He looked me straight in the eye, his gaze intense. If the worst ever happens, if they ever put what I've built before what we've built, you know what to do. Protect the legacy, Eleanor, not the money. The legacy, promise me. I promise, I had whispered, a knot of unease in my throat. I didn't fully understand. Then I thought he was being dramatic. Morbid now, sitting in my beige prison. I understood perfectly. The legacy wasn't the stock portfolio or the real estate holdings. It was the principle behind them, and my children were failing the testament. My chance came in the form of a new, young orderly named Leo. He was a student, working his way through college. And he had kind eyes. He didn't treat me like a piece of furniture. He'd ask me about the books I was reading and actually listen to the answer one afternoon. He was collecting lunch trays. I had deliberately hidden my dessert, a small cup of pudding, under my pillow. Did you not like the pudding, Mrs. Vance? He asked gently. I looked at him, my eyes wide and pleading. I let my hand tremble as I reached out and touched his arm. My son, I whispered, he loves pudding. Could you make sure he gets this? Leo looked confused. Your son isn't here. Mrs. Vance. Oh, I said, my face falling. I keep forgetting. I saw the flicker of pity in his eyes. Perfect. The next day, I did something similar. I had managed to hide the small gold locket I always wore under my tongue when they processed me. It was tiny, engraved with a nightingale, a gift from Richard. I pressed it into Leo's hand. Please, I whispered conspiratorially. This is for my lawyer. It's very important. His name is Abernathy. Samuel Abernathy. He's an old friend. He needs to know that the nightingale needs to sing. Leo looked at the locket, then at me. He was about to give it back, to call a nurse. I could see the conflict on his face. My children. They don't understand, I whispered, tears welling in my eyes. It wasn't a complete lie. They think they're helping, but they're mistaken. Please, Mr. Abernathy will. He'll make everything right. He'll explain. I don't know what it was, the desperation in my eyes, the genuine weight of the gold locket in his hand, or some innate sense of decency. He hesitated, then slipped the locket into his pocket. I can't make any promises, Mrs. Vance, he said quietly. Just try, I breathed. Tell him the nightingale needs to sing. He'll understand. He nodded and left the room. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The message had been sent. The plan Richard and I had made, our desperate, last resort contingency, was now in motion. I had done my part. Now, all I could do was wait for Mr. Abernathy. All I could do was hope that my performance had been convincing enough to buy me the time I needed. Subscribe now, you won't believe the twist that's coming. The days that followed were the longest of my life. Every footstep in the hall sent a jolt through me. Was it Abernathy? Or was it a nurse coming to tell me my children had decided to sell the house? The not knowing was a physical ache. I continued my charade, a docile, slightly confused old woman, but inside I was a tightly coiled spring of anticipation and rage. During one of Mark's dutiful weekly calls, he sounded distracted, almost cheerful. Just wanted to let you know we've had the house appraised, Mom. Just for insurance purposes, of course. Insurance purposes. The lie was so blatant it was almost insulting. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I kept my voice soft and vague. Appraised? That's nice, dear. Is your father there? I wanted to ask him about the garden. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Mom, Mark said, his voice dripping with condescension. Dad's gone. Remember? Oh, I said, letting a note of pathetic confusion enter my voice. Oh, yes. I forget sometimes. I hung up the phone, my hand shaking not with weakness, but with fury. They were moving faster than I'd thought. They were getting ready to carve up my life and sell it for parts. Time was running out. Then, one Tuesday morning, it happened. A nurse came to my room, her expression uncharacteristically flustered. Eleanor, you have a visitor. Your lawyer. He's waiting for you in the conference room. She paused, then added, your children are on their way as well. They've been summoned. Summoned. What a beautiful word. I took a deep breath, smoothing down my pale blue sweatsuit. The show was about to begin. When I entered the conference room, the scene was already set. My lawyer, Samuel Abernathy, stood by the window, his back to the room. He was a tall, stoic man who had been my husband's closest friend since college. He looked older, grayer, but when he turned, his eyes were as sharp and intelligent as ever. He gave me a slow, almost imperceptible nod. On the table in front of him was a formidable stack of documents and a laptop. Mark and Sarah were already seated, looking furious. "What is the meaning of this, Abernathy?" Mark demanded as I sat down. "You have no right to be here. We are our mother's legal guardians now." "That is precisely what we are here to discuss, Mark," Abernathy said, his voice calm and level, cutting through my son's anger like a surgeon's scalpel. He pulled out a chair for me, and I sat, folding my hands demurely in my lap. I kept my eyes downcast, my expression placid and slightly vacant. "Mom, are you okay?" Sarah asked, her voice laced with a guilt that was a day late and $1 short. "Did he upset you?" I just gave her a weak, confused smile. Abernathy cleared his throat, commanding the room. "As you both know," he began, "I was the executor of your father's will." Richard was a meticulous man. He planned for every eventuality. He paused, letting his words hang in the air, including this one. Mark scoffed. "What are you talking about?" His will was perfectly clear. "The estate is held in trust, managed by our mother. Managed by our mother while she is of sound mind and body," Abernathy corrected him gently. "A condition which you have recently taken legal action to dispute. In doing so, you have, I'm afraid, activated a very specific and secret provision within the Richard Vance Family Trust. A provision Richard and I referred to as the Nightingale Protocol." At the word Nightingale, I saw Sarah's eyes flicker towards me. A sliver of unease had finally pierced her self-pity. Mark, however, just looked annoyed. "Protocol? What is this, a spy movie? Get to the point." "Very well," Abernathy said. He turned on the laptop, and the screen came to life. And there he was. My Richard. He looked younger, thinner, the illness not yet having taken its full toll, but his eyes were the same. He was sitting in his armchair in our sunroom, the afternoon light catching the silver in his hair. My breath hitched. "Hello, Mark." "Hello, Sarah," Video Richard said, his voice filling the sterile room with a warmth it did not deserve. "If you are watching this, it means that something has gone terribly wrong. It means that your mother, Eleanor, has been deemed incapacitated. And it means you were the ones who made it so." Mark and Sarah stared at the screen, stunned into silence. "I love you both," Richard continued, his voice heavy with a sorrow that transcended time. "But love does not make one blind. Mark, I have seen your impatience, your belief that my life's work is simply a pile of money waiting for you. Sarah, I have seen your kind heart, but also your fear of conflict, your tendency to be led. I feared that one day, these traits might lead you to make a terrible mistake. To see your mother not as a person to be cared for, but as an obstacle to be managed." He leaned forward, his gaze seeming to pin them to their chairs. "So your mother and I made a plan. A test, if you will. The entire Vance estate, the house, the stocks, every last penny you have been so eager to get your hands on, is not technically ours. It is owned by a charitable foundation I established years ago. The Nightingale Foundation for Neurological Research." Mark's face went white. Sarah put a hand to her mouth. "Your mother and I were the directors," Richard's voice explained. "And you, my children, were named as lifetime beneficiaries, set to receive a comfortable, but not extravagant, income from the trust. But that status was conditional. It was contingent upon your demonstration of good character, and most importantly, on your unwavering care and respect for your mother after I was gone." Abernathy slid a document across the table. "The trust documents are quite clear," he said quietly. "Clause 12B. The Nightingale Protocol. It states, and I quote, 'In the event that Eleanor Vance is involuntarily committed to a long-term care facility or has her legal autonomy removed at the instigation of her children, Mark Vance and / or Sarah Miller, their status as beneficiaries of the trust is to be immediately and irrevocably terminated.'" The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the sound of Richard's recorded voice. "By committing your mother," Richard said, his face a mask of profound disappointment, "you have failed the test. You have proven that your greed outweighs your love. You have violated the most sacred term of my trust. Abernathy spoke into the silence. The clause further stipulates that upon its activation, all assets revert fully and completely to the Nightingale Foundation. Full directorial control of the foundation, and therefore the entire estate, passes to a successor. The successor is named as Samuel Abernathy to act on behalf of, and under the sole direction of, Eleanor Vance. It was at that moment I decided the show was over. I sat up straight, my spine stiff, the vacant look in my eyes replaced by a blaze of cold, hard light. I looked directly at Mark, whose face was a mottled canvas of shock and fury. I looked at Sarah, who was openly weeping, her body shaking with silent sobs. The change in me was so abrupt, so total, that Mark actually recoiled. "Mom?" he whispered, his voice cracking. "Don't call me that," I said, and my voice was not the weak, wavering tone of a confused old woman. It was the voice of the woman who had run his father's company alongside him for 20 years, the woman who had balanced the books, negotiated the contracts, and raised 2 children. It was a voice of steel. "Nothing," Mark shrieked, finally finding his voice. "We get nothing? The house? My inheritance?" I leaned forward, my hands flat on the table. The years of pretense, the weeks of humiliation, the lifetime of love I had poured into them, all coalesced into a single, devastating moment of clarity. "Your inheritance?" I asked, my voice dangerously soft. "You had your inheritance every day of your life. You had a home filled with love. You had parents who gave you everything you needed and more. You had a legacy of integrity and compassion from your father. That was your inheritance, and you spat on it, you threw it all away because you couldn't wait to count the money that was never meant for you. It was meant to help people to cure the very disease that took your father from you." I stood up, feeling a strength I hadn't felt in years. I looked down at my children. "My broken, greedy children, you didn't commit me to this place to protect me. You did it to silence me. You did it to steal from your father's memory well. You have failed. The nightingale is singing, just as he always knew it might have to." I turned my back on their shattered faces and walked towards the door, with Mr. Abernathy following for the first time in a month. I was walking out of a room. Not being led, I was free, but as the door clicked shut behind me, sealing them in with the ghost of their father and the ruins of their own making, I felt no triumph, only a vast, hollow sorrow for the children I had lost long before I was ever locked away. Walking out of Meadowbrook Manor was like taking the first breath after nearly drowning. The air, crisp with the scent of autumn, filled my lungs. The world seemed brighter, the colors more vivid. Mr. Abernathy drove me home in his quiet, comfortable sedan. We didn't speak much. There was nothing left to say. The plan had worked. The cost was still being calculated. The key I used to open my own front door felt strange in my hand. A familiar object made foreign by my absence. The house was silent. But it was a different kind of silence now. It wasn't the sound of waiting, but the sound of return. The air was stale. A thin layer of dust coated the furniture. A stack of mail lay on the hall table. Mostly flyers and bills. They hadn't even bothered to sort it. I walked into the sunroom. The potted orchid they had brought me at the asylum was sitting on a side table, its garish purple flowers a stark reminder of their visit. I picked it up, carried it to the kitchen, and dropped it into the trash can. Then I went to the empty armchair by the fireplace, Richard's chair, and gently ran my hand over the worn fabric. "We did it, my love," I whispered into the quiet. "I protected the legacy just like I promised." In the days that followed, Mr. Abernathy handled the legal fallout with quiet efficiency. The guardianship was overturned. Control of the foundation and my life was officially returned to me. Mark tried to fight it. He hired a lawyer and made threats, claiming I had manipulated them, that I had feigned my illness. It was a desperate, ugly attempt that was quickly dismissed. The video of his father was irrefutable. After a week of furious, unanswered phone calls, he fell silent. 2 months passed. The autumn leaves fell, carpeting the lawn in gold and red. I tended to my garden, pulling weeds, trimming the blighted rosebush, coaxing it back to life. I worked with Mr. Abernathy on the foundation, learning the intricacies of the research grants we were funding. I found a new purpose, a new rhythm. The house began to feel like home again, the silence slowly turning from an ache of loss to a quiet peace. But a piece of my heart was missing, an amputation that still ached in the cold. One afternoon, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Sarah standing on the porch. She was thinner, her face pale, the usual confidence in her posture gone, replaced by a fragile uncertainty. She wasn't holding a guilt offering of flowers. Her hands were empty. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I hesitated for a moment, then stepped aside. We sat in the sunroom, in the same spots we had occupied during the ambush, the memory a ghost between us. She didn't try to make excuses. She didn't blame Mark. She just looked at me, her eyes filling with tears that were, for the first time, not for herself. "I'm so sorry, Mom," she said, her voice breaking. "There is no excuse for what I did. I was weak, and I was greedy, and I let Mark convince me it was the right thing to do. But it wasn't. It was monstrous." She took a shaky breath. "It wasn't about the money. Not really. It was about, I don't know, control, fear. When Dad died, I felt so lost, and Mark seemed so sure of everything. I just went along, and I broke the most important thing in my life. I broke your trust. I broke Dad's trust. I am so sorry." I looked at my daughter, my beautiful, flawed daughter. I saw the little girl who used to bring me drawings and the teenager who used to slam doors. And I saw the woman before me, stripped of her pride, offering a genuine, painful apology. The ice around my heart, the protective wall I had built, began to crack. "Mark hasn't spoken to me since that day in the conference room," she said quietly, twisting her hands in her lap. "He blames me. He says if I hadn't been so emotional, you wouldn't have been able to trick us." "It wasn't a trick, Sarah," I said softly. "It was a lesson. One your father prayed you would never have to learn." We sat in silence for a long time, the late afternoon sun slanting through the windows. The rage was gone, replaced by a deep, abiding sadness. I had won. I had saved my husband's legacy. But in doing so, I had to detonate my own family. "I don't expect you to forgive me," Sarah said, standing to leave. "I just wanted you to know." I wanted to say it. "Sarah," I said, and she stopped, her back to me. "Forgiveness isn't a switch you can flip. It's a path you walk. And it's a long one." She turned, a flicker of hope in her tear-filled eyes. I gave her a small, sad smile. "Maybe," I said, my voice thick with emotion, "you could come for tea next week. And you can tell me about my grandchildren. I've missed them." A sob escaped her lips, a sound of pure relief. She nodded, unable to speak, and quickly left. I watched her go, a mother's love, a stubborn, painful, and resilient thing. I had lost a son to his greed, but perhaps, just perhaps, I had a chance to find my daughter again. My life was not what I had planned, but it was mine. I had honored my husband, I had reclaimed myself, and in the quiet of my home, surrounded by the legacy of our love, I would begin the slow, difficult work of healing. Comment which part of the story left you speechless.